First of all, can I introduce myself? I'm Mike Foley. I'm the head teacher of the Thomas Hardy School, and I'd just first of all like to really warmly welcome you. Lovely to see people turning out in such fantastic numbers. And I particularly want to welcome Gail Thomas, who's the Dean of Health and Social Care, who's going to introduce the main item for this evening. Gail, over to you.
Lovely to see you all. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. My main role at the university is Dean of Health and Social Care, but I also head up the Centre for Excellence in Learning at the university, which is a fairly new initiative, but an important one, because I think learning is what we're all about, both at school and at university. And I think that the poster that talks about aim higher is something that the university supports enthusiastically, really, trying to help children and young people to set their aspirations high and to want to come on to university, college, learn more and learn longer in their lives, really. Tonight's an important initiative, listening to Neil talking to us about dyslexia. I think I've been struck. I suppose I've been working in universities for about 20 odd years now, and I'm always amazed with increasing numbers of students who have been diagnosed as dyslexic well into their university career. Often as they go up the levels and the expectations become harder for them, we can get people at the end of their second year at university and it's the first time they've ever been noted to be dyslexic. And what a triumph to them that they've got that far in life without the diagnosis, but what difficulty they may have incurred along the way, or lack of self-esteem, and some of the things that have been flashing up in front of us. People who've been incredibly successful in their lives, but really may have had quite a struggle in achieving it because they weren't seen as intelligent in that typical sense of the word. So I'm really looking forward to what Neil has to say to us this evening. I think he's going to try and turn a few things on its head. So I suspect we will all go home with some new perspectives and certainly some food for thought. So thank you for coming. It's the university's pleasure to be sponsoring this event, and we hope to be able to continue the relationship that we've started with Thomas Hardy School, as well as the other schools in the county, in setting aspirations high.
At about 8:30 this morning, in Dorset, in England, in North Wales, where I live, you know what? There were students, and they were coming to school like this. Yeah? Maybe the old member of staff. Yeah? Oh, dear. Another day. Oh. And the reason they're coming to school like this is because about 10 to 15% of your school population, any population, are dyslexic to some degree. 10 to 15%. And you know who they are because they think faster than they read it, write it, and spell it. So in here, it doesn't come out. And I'm going to argue that rather than look on them as being disabled or dysfunctional, if we just look at it in a different way, if we just fine-tune our already amazing practice, the smallest tweaks, instead of coming to school like polar bears, you know what? I'm coming to school like this. As my dyslexic penguin with more than a touch of ADHD, which is probably about right. And I'm still teaching. My views come from my teaching. I have the privilege of teaching a group this afternoon. This is me teaching in South Australia and doing what I do quite a lot of, which is teaching students and being observed by teachers. And what I'd like you to notice is that after, 20 odd years of teaching, I still haven't lost my touch. It's a gift. It's a gift. In fact, she's sulking, actually. I had the nerve to suggest that if she stopped, talked a bit less and wrote a bit more, we get a little bit more done. Whereupon the head went down on the table. But I ignored her and she started, you know what it is. Anyway, there's lots of things going on in education. And it's really quite an exciting time, I think. We have our new code of practice, we have a new national curriculum, and we have a newish Ofsted framework. And actually, for once, serendipity, actually, they're all pulling in roughly the same direction, a direction which I think is going to be very good for our dyslexic students. And when I do talk about dyslexic students, as I say, I'm going to talk about the 10 to 15% who will probably never get a label, but they will do that thinking bit. They think so much faster. Now, within that group is 4%. Now, that 4% are going to have needs that require a specialist. There's no question about that. You know, whatever anybody thinks, no matter how dyslexia aware a school is, dyslexia-friendly university is, there will always be students who need that specialist support. But I'm not going to talk about those tonight. I'm going to talk about our 10 to 15%. So I thought, what about you? So those of you who are teaching today, I wonder who was teaching somebody who really, really got it. Really, really understood it. But the thing this student couldn't do was read it, or write it, or spell it. And just for me now, if you were teaching or supporting somebody like that today, could you raise your hand for me? Go on, show me, go on, show me. Okay, thank you. Right, I've got a new dyslexia screen. I'll tell you what it is. I'm going to dare you to do it. Okay? Here's my new dyslexia screen. It only works for students who are native English speakers at the moment, but I'll explain why. Who do you teach then? Who, if you got them a SATs paper or a GCSE paper, and you read them the questions and wrote down the answers they gave you, they'd go up at least a level. Yeah? Who do you teach? Is it dyslexia? Don't know. It probably is. James came up with a lovely phrase this morning. It may not be the label, but it might be the explanation. You know? So let's look at this, all of this, in this context. So there we have it. And it's happening in higher education too. It's not just, except we're having a few problems in higher education with cuts at the moment. This man is probably on the dartboard of every students' union. Because of course what it's all about is doing more and more with less and less, and the students' union are getting quite cross about it as well. So, in all our sectors, we are being pressed to do more and more with less and less. So let's see if we can make it work. The drivers of change in school are here. Our national curriculum is placing an even greater obligation than before for us to plan for, this is a phrase they use a lot, low prior attainers. I work a lot abroad. I'm lucky to work in New Zealand, where they have an interesting phrase. They talk about priority learners. Now, in New Zealand, it means a specific thing, but I'm going to try and embrace this. The idea of priority learners. Who are the priority learners in your schools? Who are the priority learners in your colleges or universities? The ones who are at risk of not being the best they can be. So we can make them anybody we like. The phrase we're using in, it's not going to show, is low prior attainers. Ofsted are asking a typically aggressive question, is too much specialist provision being used to top up relatively poor teaching? It's a typical Ofsted charm offensive. Well, actually, it's probably true. Because as a Senko myself in my time, I have given a lot of support to youngsters who actually, if the teachers knew just enough of what some of us knew, they could actually do some of those things and take that frontline action. And we have a new code of practice, which is saying, regardless of your prior attainment, we've got to set high expectation for all. And one of the things I think that comes with this is we must resist the temptation to associate accurate reading and accurate spelling with intelligence. Yeah? Because although intelligent people, a lot of intelligent people do read and spell accurately, a lot of people who read and spell accurately are not intelligent. Okay? Not intelligent. And I'm going to bet, if you are a teacher, there are students in higher sets, on higher tables, in primary school, who have the most wonderful basic skills. Brilliant reading, brilliant spelling, brilliant writing, and they cannot think their way out of a wet paper bag. Yeah? And you've got other students whose basic skills reduce you and them to tears of frustration, but they can think. And the thinkers will go forward. What is the career path for students who can read and spell but can't think? That's probably politics. Oh, there's nothing left. Nothing left out. Okay, nothing at all. So, embrace our thinkers, because they will inherit the earth. The national curriculum then, no barriers to everybody achieving. Well, that's very dyslexia friendly. So even though you don't read it or spell it or write it too well, you're going to make sure you achieve. Fluent readers by 5 in their dreams, we'll ignore that one. What is happening in primary schools particularly is that we're going to have to use the foundation subjects to drive basics, because there's not enough time anymore. And that is so good for our dyslexic students. Because what it means is that the things that we're going to teach during English, our literacy bits will now have to be reinforced through geography, through science, through history, through ICT, and I'll show you later why that is going to be so good for our dyslexic students. To plan for a low level of attainment, low prior attainment, absolutely. I guess one of the things we need to do very strongly, especially those of us working with younger students, is not give the benefit of the doubt. So by that I mean, let's look for trouble. Let's look at our students who aren't learning 5 lessons in a week. And instead of saying, oh, they might come on later, it's developmental, let's assume it isn't. Let's assume it's a problem. And, and take action. Don't label. Just look for trouble. As a secondary teacher, and there will be secondary teachers here, I've been teaching 16-year-olds who were told their parents were told when they were 8 they would come on later, and they're still waiting. Yeah? So if we look for trouble, put intervention in place, hey, it's going to work. Deliberately ambitious targets, we'll touch on that. Stretch and risk. Go for stretch. Go for risk. My daughter is a teacher in Manchester. She's recently been inspected. Her heart was set on being outstanding. The reason she wasn't, because they said you didn't take enough risks. Yeah? You weren't adventurous enough in your targets. You weren't pushing. You weren't stretching, especially the students with of low prior attainment. And the final point is our rigorous and systematic phonics, as long as we need it. So that is the ballpark that we're in. Ofsted we've covered. Bottom one, 4.3 is key. No barriers to every student achieving. That's a dyslexia one as well. And the code of practice is saying at the bottom there, additional intervention and support cannot compensate for good quality teaching. So I think we are being driven to be able to identify, notice and adjust on behalf of our students who think faster than they read it, write it and spell it. Don't have a label, but are almost bound to be dyslexic to some degree. And I'll skip that one because I want to talk about this one. And within that, there are some real good classroom practices before I come on to the main point. And this is John Hattie. Now, I don't know if you've come across the work of John Hattie. Very interesting American. Currently a professor in Brisbane. And he does these meta-analyses where he looks at thousands and thousands and thousands of bits of data. And he says these are the top 6 things that make a huge difference. Now, he's looking generically, but every single one actually moves dyslexic students forward. The first one he says is reciprocal teaching, which I will touch on. Reciprocal teaching is a wonderful group-based way of enabling different groups to interact with reading and then text. Perfect for our new primary and secondary situations where there isn't going to be the time to reinforce basic skills during literacy time. Feedback is his next point, which I will touch. Self-talk. He says, be careful what you say when you're talking to yourself, because you're listening. Metacognition, absolutely, thinking about thinking. The power of direct instruction and mastery learning. Now, those 6 things, he would argue, and his meta-analyses prove it, actually, they are the core of great teaching. And what is lovely about this is every single one of those moves on our think faster students. So let's look at this and now try and make my case. Because I'm going to argue that we should be looking at dyslexia in a different way. And I'm going to argue for a preference paradigm. I'm going to try and persuade you that the best way to look at dyslexia in the classroom and at the home is not as a disability, not as a difficulty, but a preferred way of doing things. And try and make my case. And I'm going to try and benchmark it with some theory. So, for example, we have Professor John Stein, and we have West London, his Christian name, saying, yes, it needs to be much more visual. And interesting when you talk to students, they say one of the things we do as teachers is we almost, to a man and a woman, we take stuff off the screen too quickly. They need it up there longer. They are more visual learners. Given and Reed, 1999, more metacognitive, more understanding of how individuals work best. What's your best way? If we know what your best way is, we can encourage you to do it your best way. And of course that naturally leads on to marking alternative evidence of achievement. Marking the mind maps, marking the storyboards, marking the flowcharts, and not always asking for it to be written up. Dyslexic boys, or boys in general, but dyslexic boys in particular, have never understood why you have to do a best copy. What is that all about? I've just done it. I'm going to do it again. I'll give you a different copy with different mistakes willingly. Not a best copy. But if I know my best ways, yeah. And equally true, let's use the freedom in the national curriculum to assess through mind maps, assess through storyboards, assess through flowcharts, assess through animated PowerPoint, and not always require them to be written up, because those things are markable in their own right. Where we have here, we've got the Rose Report, we've got Maggie Snowling, we've got these people. More explicit, more episodic, I'll make that point. More multisensory, absolutely. Now, all of those things actually touch everybody. When I'm working with sixth form, when I'm working with master students, you know what? I'm more multisensory, I'm more explicit, I'm more episodic, I'm more metacognitive. And in fact, we learn very well. So these are actually core things. And the final one is more frameworks and scaffolded, and I've taken them cheeky, actually, I've quoted myself there, for arguing for frameworks. So what I'll try and do in our time together is touch on all of those and argue that when those things are in place, what is perceived as, if you like, a disability, actually no. The issues are because the students are not being taught in the way that they learn. So let's see if I can carry it there. Now, when you think about visual issues, it really is quite scary. And hope this is going to work for me. This is how some students' eyes move when they're reading. Which isn't helpful. Now, this isn't a dyslexic thing, but a lot of dyslexic students' eyes do work this way. In fact, up to about 30% of the population, 30%, way beyond my 15%, 30% of the population find black fonts on white paper distressing. It causes visual stress. And this is to do with the stark contrast between the black fonts and the white paper. The work of John Stein particularly, although it's controversial, Professor Stein's work, shows that a lot of students will, when they see black fonts on white paper, it swims and it swirls, there are gaps in the wrong place, and it is so easy to deal with. Because filters like this, overlays like that, and I forgot to get mine, excuse me just 1 minute, because I have the cheap version. This is the school on a budget version, which is that, is making such a difference to so many learners. Now, it would be wrong to say that if this is helpful, you are dyslexic, although a number of dyslexic students do actually find this helpful. My challenge tomorrow, the day after, is to go into school, mums and dads at home as well, get a range of these from Staples, different colours, and just make them available, and say, hey, does any of these make a difference? If it does, use it. It doesn't label, it explains the problem that you have, and what it does is it cuts this out. And you will know this, because the student goes, oh! You say, what's the matter? You say, hey, the words have stopped moving. They don't move anymore. And you realise that for years and years and years, as this student was trying to read, they were trying to read the words before they fell off the page, and they thought everybody had to do that. Now, what a simple thing to do. The schools that are taking this on board now are not using white paper anywhere. And I've been working with a school recently. They've done it by stealth. What they've done is they've loaded a pastel shade of paper into every photocopier and every printer in the school. So unless you check, you hit the button, it comes out blue. Now, isn't that easy? Isn't that easy? The early research thought that a pastel-y, beigey colour was best. Stein's research would say blue is best. Now, Stein's research is controversial. He gets a lot of stick for his work. Some of it isn't as well, research isn't as well structured as it might be. And this causes some people to say, because the research model is faulty, this cannot be true. Luckily, the students haven't read that research. So let's be pragmatic about it. Let's try and see. With a show of hands then, please, has anybody had pleasing success with overlays and colours? Right, just look around, please, guys. Look around, look around. That is the proof in the pudding, okay? Probably half of the teachers here have tried it, and it's working. So, mums and dads as well, key thing. When homework comes home then, if it comes home on black on white, then this will do it, or photocopy yourself onto a different colour. So that is that. So let's argue, let's see if I can make this case then about if we took dyslexia as a preferred way of learning, and we worked out metacognitively what is necessary, is it better, is it going to work? Well, yeah, I think we'd be looking at dyslexia the wrong way. I think we'd be looking through the wrong end of the telescope. If we'd never seen a telescope before, somebody gave us one, there'd be a great temptation to hold the big end to our eye and look down and think, hey, I've got this device for looking at something really tiny a long, long way away. And we've done this with dyslexia. We've been driven to focus on the things they can't do, which has basically become automatic on the reading, the spelling, and the aspects of information processing. If we turn it round, we begin to see other things. And this was part of the slideshow I was showing before. You know, it takes a very special mind to think about traffic calming like this. Don't you think? You know? You've got to be dyslexic to think that one up. And this different mind, this different brain. When the Titanic movie was first put together, you know, all the Kate most of the team doing the cutting-edge CGI were dyslexic. You had to be dyslexic. You couldn't do it otherwise. Richard Taylor, I should say, the leader of Weta, the people in New Zealand who did Lord of the Rings, he said, yeah, most of my best people are dyslexic. Weta's recruitment policy is to recruit people who used to draw monsters on their pencil cases during maths exams. There's Robin Williams. This is Robin Williams' school passport. Look at that. So he's a smart child, dyslexia and anxiety. It affects all these things. So let's do these things. And remember, he's a smart child. Yeah? There's a specific learning difference. So let's build on it. And this sort of best practice here actually really is the right of every student. And in university as well as in school. Okay, so let's try and go for the paradigm shift again and see how we do. When you look at brains through MRI scans, they're not... Somebody said actually it's a bit like trying to work out what's going on in a busy school by looking at whether the lights are on or not, which is quite hard. So what you have here is a neurotypical student and a dyslexic student in a functional MRI scanner. And they're doing the same thing. It doesn't really matter what they're doing. They could be clapping for they could be solving a problem. They could be reading. It doesn't really matter. But what you notice is a difference in brain activity. And that really is what is dyslexia more than anything else. It's a differently wired brain. Until we had MRI technology, the only way you could really get at this was by an autopsy. Now, I don't know what you think. I think an autopsy is a very permanent way to discover dyslexia. Although it may be the only way shortly where you can get extra time. Well, bring me the autopsy before that's going to happen that way. And of course you may have one or two students you're keen to volunteer for an autopsy, and I can understand that as well. But what this shows us though is this differently wired brain conveys the opportunity and the cost of being dyslexic. And the cost is you do not become automatic as easily and as quickly. Dyslexia robs you of time. It definitely robs you of time. You may have heard of Asperger's time, which is twice as long for half as much. And I think dyslexia, to some extent, is a bit like this. Because the routine things, the sounds, the symbols, all those things, just take so much longer to get. And although I'm a passionate believer in the power of phonics, I also acknowledge that many dyslexic students don't get phonics. And death by phonics is not necessarily the right route if you're dyslexic. There are other ways. What's happening in the brain then is that as the brain is organising itself in the womb, elements of brain function are migrating from one side to the other. So much of our language processing is typically left brain. Elements of that will move to the right brain. Much of our visual processing is back here. Elements will move to the left. So when a dyslexic student is trying to do some reading or some spelling, they have to move around their brains in an atypical way. This also explains the gender difference, because we think there are probably 4 dyslexic boys to every 1 dyslexic girl. I think there are more dyslexic girls, but dyslexic girls hide it. If you are a dyslexic girl, you're well motivated, you have neat handwriting, you sit with a group of supportive friends, you're very hard to spot. Boys are easier. Girls hide it by working insanely hard, which is not something we associate with our boys necessarily. But interestingly, when we get to college and university, it levels out. And in fact, boys sometimes don't hit the wall the way girls do. Because all of a sudden working insanely hard doesn't work, working smart does. And boys have learned to work smart as they, ducked and weaved and bobbed their way through school. So we have this difference. The gender difference is there, the differently wired brain. What's to become of dyslexics? Oh dear me. Oh dear. Well, you become a surgeon. You become an artist. You become a writer. You become a leader, a movie star, a sports star. You become Richard Branson. Now, I just don't get how those people are disabled. I just do not get it. Now, I understand you have to be disabled to pull down funding. Yes. But I also think that viewing our students as being disabled is actually demeaning, it's insulting, and actually fundamentally very unhelpful. And bear in mind that most students in this category will never ever qualify for this label. So I think we'll knock the disability one out of the way for now, and we'll say when these people are taught the way they learn and are permitted to be the people they are, they'll be hugely successful. But you talk to these guys, and you know what? They always say one thing. We had to leave school to become successful. Yeah? So anything we can do about that will be great. So there we have some more. There's Theo Thingy from Dragon's Den. Branson, fascinating. There's a wonderful DVD out, called Big Picture. It's produced by James Redford, Robert Redford's son. Really worth a look. And it's got people like Branson talking about their problems and where they are now. There's the governor of California, there's a top neurosurgeon, all these people. Branson apparently has only recently cottoned on to what net profit is. He didn't understand it. All this stuff, doesn't understand net profit. Classic dyslexia. All these things you can do, and there's a great big hole where something isn't there. But he doesn't allow it to bother him, because he goes on and he does other stuff. So, disability? No. Difficulty? Maybe. Difference? Possibly. Preference? Let's see if I can get there. I describe dyslexia then as a preference. I call it constitutional in origin because it's your brain. Your brain is different, it always will be. We should never talk about curing you, because if we cure you, we don't get the Venus de Milo. You cure Leonardo da Vinci, it doesn't work. Einstein, you think was dyslexic. Cure Einstein, you don't end up in space. Branson, you don't get virgin. Well, that might be all right. We won't go there. But what does happen is you have unexpected difficulties becoming automatic. That's the point. You're so good at other stuff. You're at least as good as your friends, and possibly better. So why can't you do this? If you are from your classic middle-class family, two-parent family, and you'll read with you every night, and all the right things, and you still can't read what is going on, let alone all the other things. So, calling it a preference, I will go with. Constitutional because it's your brain, and you just don't get automatic. It always takes time. Family history is one of the things we look at. A surprising number. It does run in families. If your mum and dad are dyslexic, you probably will be too. If your big brother or big sister is, look at little brother, little sister, definitely. Crawling is an interesting one. Disproportionate number of dyslexic children don't crawl. Now, if your child doesn't crawl and then hits landmarks as you expect, don't worry about it. But if they don't crawl and then don't hit landmarks, it's a tick in the box. This one is a mistake, obviously. I've left it in because it's the form of dyslexia, it's the result of a form of dyslexia you would have experienced yourself. This is the result of late-night stress-induced alcohol-enhanced dyslexia that I was suffering from when I did the slide. It should say dressing difficulties. I used to teach PE once upon a time, and if I had £1 for every tie I've tied, shoelace I've helped with, cuff buttons, top buttons, these students are the most wonderfully coordinated people, and yet little things they just can't do. Labels, rhymes and sequences. I was chatting to students this afternoon, wonderful time with 14 or 15 year 9 and 10s, and I said, I think I know something about you. He sort of looked at me. I said, you know probably every word of every song that One Direction have ever done. and yet you can't remember certain stuff. They say, yeah, that's us, yeah. So labels writing, not your best thing. They spell out and read it on one line, get it wrong on the next. And some teachers think they do it on purpose. And they don't. It's dyslexia. We'll look at why in a minute. The enhanced creativity is legendary. We're not talking about necessarily hugely creative. But in any university faculty, if you go to any university, in certain faculties, you will find in the more creative areas there will be dyslexic people. Just as in the more scientific areas there will be people somewhere on the autism spectrum. It's the same in schools, secondary schools, where we know in further education, higher education, there will be a disproportionate number of adults who got through the system through hard work, perseverance, and downright cussedness, and their creativity is coming through it. So we're talking about students who appear as bright as their peers. Mums and dads know this because their friends come around and you talk to them, you hear what's going on, and your child is just as good until it comes to that reading, writing bit. When we do profiles, we can actually begin to see what's going on. I dropped this one in today because I suddenly realised it ought to go here. This is from a cognitive profile that teachers can do. You don't need to be a psychologist to do it, although you do need to think carefully about how the interpretation goes. So have a look at this. This is Jenny. Jenny's doing, this is a COPS profile. And look at the visual spatial memory. Look at that. She's below the 30th centile. Now that's her reading memory. That's the memory she uses to remember the shapes of words, where she's seen them, what they look like and how they work. So it's no surprise she doesn't read very well. Her auditory sequential memory is even lower. 85% of children of her age have a better auditory sequential memory. That's your spelling memory. That's making cat. Now, you're a bright bunch of people. You see this box here? Out loud, please. What's that word? Altogether it is? Well done. This one? How'd you do that? You've never seen them before. You have word attack skills. Jenny doesn't. In fact, 96% of her peers do it better than this. Jenny can only read words she's seen before. Hasn't seen it before, she is sunk. And she has been phonics to death. And for her, it hasn't worked. Now, I'm not knocking phonics, trust me. But for Jenny, it's probably not the way. She's not getting it. And you will not be surprised that she cannot read words in isolation. But there's something about that profile which is out of kilter, isn't it? And you spotted it, haven't you? Only 8% of her peers have better reading. So what's going on? What on earth is going on there? Why can't she do this stuff? And when I do this for teachers, we ask the question, where do you start? For Jenny. And a lot of teachers quite understand and say, I think what we'll do, we'll start with phonics and word attack skills. You know what? No, I don't think I would. I think I'm going to start with memory. Because I think her problems are memory related initially. And putting time into working on memory and memory skills is proven to be very beneficial. What does worry me is what table she's on in a primary school and what set she's in a secondary school. Because I've got a horrible feeling in a primary school she's on the special needs table, and in a secondary school she's in a box set. And yet there are few brighter children in either school. So one of the challenges I do want to put on the table, for teachers particularly, is let's look for our Jennies, you've got them, and let's ask the question, how can we support them to be educated with their intellectual peers? Because schools are doing it now. They're making sure that Jenny is being supported in the thinking, in the writing bits, the reading bits, but she's doing all the thinking, all the arguing, all the talking, all that reasoning with the people who think like she does. And teachers and TAs here will know it's much easier to teach a thinking child how to read and spell than a reading and spelling child how to think. So I really firmly want to put this challenge on the table, and I know that schools are picking it up. Drive it, push it, and it is working. So very, very bright, very, very bright. We say this is an extreme example. It doesn't have to be that extreme, but in this case, it is very clear. And the important thing is to make sure that the thinking continues and is stretched and is challenged while we build this lot up. What we mustn't do is hold it back while we build that up. We've got to keep it going. If we do hold it back, then the preference that is dyslexia will become a disadvantage. It'll become a difficulty, and it can actually become disabling. Because Treating her like a slow learner will damage her self-esteem, will damage her emotional intelligence. So, more visual, definitely. Let's change the colour of paper. Let's use overlays. What a difference that will make. More metacognitive is about knowing yourself, knowing your best things, knowing your best ways. I'm going to say get it right for dyslexic learners. You know what? We get it right for everybody. That's the benefit, I think, of looking at it this way. So let's look at dyslexic memories, because I want to talk about memory. And let's be clear that one thing you do struggle with if you are dyslexic is your semantic memory. That's your abstract rules, your procedures, remembering how things go, rules, spelling rules, these sorts of rules, that sort of rules. You're much better with an episodic memory, which is based on elements of past experience. So the work I've been doing with students this afternoon was to try and take revision out of the page and onto something they can do something with. Make it metacognitive, make it visual, make it tactile. What we do conclude from this is that dyslexic brains are actually structured for complex processes other than reading and spelling. That's not what they're for. And in fact, until literacy became a mass issue, being dyslexic wasn't a problem. And guess what? It's becoming less and less of a problem day by day through technology. Technology now is becoming so powerful that you don't need to read it. Handwriting will be dead within a few years. Nobody's going to bother anymore. Few people do now. You know, my wife said I shouldn't be allowed to say these things because she's an infant teacher. She values handwriting for reasons that we can't talk about anymore. I email myself shopping lists and text myself shopping lists. She thinks I'm crazy, but it's the way we do it. It's all changing. It's all changing. And you know now through technology that you can read yourself into a laptop, it'll type it for you. You can download your materials, it'll read it for you, and so on and so on and so on. These things are happening. Bearing this in mind, though, it is important that we do accept the importance of abstract rules and procedures. But they don't work for our guys. Equally true, we've got to get them right. So I'm going to challenge you now to complete this spelling rule. Okay? Out loud. Are you ready? Complete this rule. I before E.
The sound is E.
Oh, 1 or 2, well done. See me afterwards, we're going to start. Right. 4 people got the rest of it. Seriously, write me the word receive. R-E-C-E-I-V-E. Write it for me. What's the rule? I before E except after C. Yes, it works, doesn't it? Yeah, good. Underneath, write the word science. I before E except after C? No. No. The 4 people or 5 people who know the rule said to me, I before E except after C when the sound is E. You've got to say that bit. If you don't say that bit, it doesn't work. It's confused generations. Science follows the other rule, which you can complete for me. When 2 vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. Except when it doesn't. Because this is English. Yeah? But I before E except after C when the sound is E works most of the time. 2 vowels. So if we are going to teach our dyslexic, our spelling rules, we must bear in mind they have a big semantic memory and we've got to get the rules right. Because English is not straightforward. Okay, so what do we do for our dyslexic learners then? How do we harness a dyslexic preference? Well, Jenny, although her memories are not great, is quite a visual girl. And with the 14 students I was working with this afternoon, I've already picked up visual preferences. So visualization is the key thing. So I'm going to give you a challenge now. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes in a minute. I'm going to ask you to visualize a problem. And I'm going to ask you to indicate with your fingers the answer to my problem with your eyes closed. Okay? So would you close your eyes, please? Close your eyes. This is all about cows walking down a road, okay, in a farming area. There are 2 cows in front of a cow. There are 2 cows behind a cow. There's a cow in the middle. Show me, by raising your hand with your number of fingers, what is the least number of cows walking down the road? Show me, come on, hands up. Come on, go for it. Be bold. Be bold. Now open your eyes and look around. Okay? If you've got 3 fingers, you've got it right. Because there are 2 cows in front of a cow, 2 cows behind a cow, and a cow in the middle. Now, to do that, you've got to visualise. You have to visualise. It's not a thing I do naturally and easily. But many of our dyslexic students, they go, why'd you do that? That's pathetic. Because they just can. They can see it in their mind's eye. So visualisation for spelling is critical, and we'll look at that in another context. So our dyslexic students do struggle with implicit learning. That's chalk and talk, whiteboard and talk, imitating. But when they do create and demonstrate, it's fantastic. So more multisensory, actually, when lessons are more multisensory, that preference, which is dyslexia, works very well. And this one works extremely well too. Have you ever broken your heart and the heart of a child trying to explain the doubling rule? It's ridiculous, isn't it? You know, how does hope become hoping and hop become hopping? And you take off an E and add another letter, burst into tears, and it still doesn't work. And it was a dyslexic student who saw it another way. Because we were doing syllables, and I'll make the case for syllables shortly. And it works like this. Rather than worry about crossing off and adding and doubling, let's do syllables. So get your hand ready. Please, hand ready. What am I going to do first? It's going to be, yeah, okay. What I'd like you to do for me is, with me, clap hopping. Ready? Now do it and say it. Now this time say it, and I want to hear both P's. It's essential I hear both P's. Ready? Right. So the first syllable of hopping is hop. So what do? Well, what we do is we actually add hop to ping. Right? Ping is the unit. Head is the unit. Per is the unit. Okay? We do that. Let's do hoping. Ready? First syllable of hoping is ho. So what do? Guess what? We add ho to ping. Sorted? Sorted. So all those hours we spent, we've wasted trying to give our dyslexic students rules, can actually turn into something. A dyslexic student did this, very visual, very straightforward. It works. It works enough to be worth using, except when it doesn't, because that's English. But the generalisation is there. In 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, that's going to work. When it doesn't work, we'll still know what you mean, so it's okay. So keep it explicit. I'm going to skip through that and talk about that. I want to talk about working memory then, because that's a huge issue for our dyslexic students. I'm sorry for skipping ahead, but I'm anxious to try and keep to time and leave some time for questions. So there I am this afternoon working with Year 9 and Year 10 students. And almost to a man and a woman, they doubt their memories. And it became particularly clear when we did an activity toward the end of the evening where I challenged them to process some information, and then I quizzed them on the information, and I gave them a chance to set their own target score. So the idea was we had a list of information, they processed it in ways that suited them, and I said, okay, now here's the quiz, how many out of 15 do you think you'll get? And they went for 5, 6, and 7. At the end of it, everybody doubled their target. They were twice as successful. Because they worked in a preferential way. They worked in a way that was benchmarked on the psychology of memory. But I also thought it was important to explain to them how their memory works, because there's some interesting research beginning to come out of America now, which is showing that when students understand their memories, understand their brains, they are just so much more effective. How low can this go? How young can this go? Probably right the way down. I would have thought 5 and 6 year olds. I don't spend much time with 5 and 6 year olds because I'm frightened children below the age of 7. But when I do work with them, I'm amazed at how much they can do. So this is what I took the students through this afternoon. And what we find is that working memory is quite an interesting thing because it doesn't last very long and you can't do very much with it unless you know how it works. Basically, you can only really handle about 7 items at a time. And an item is one piece of information. So it could be your, remembering your mobile phone number. Now, I won't ask for a show of hands, but I know there are people here who do not know their mobile phone number. Right? They know everybody else's, but not their own, because they haven't practiced enough and so on. But it's too long. 7 items, 15 to 20 seconds, yeah. But if we can group the items, the minute we start to group the items, what was 4 or 5 or 6 items becomes 1 item. So if we're doing a shopping list, for example, A shopping list which actually groups items by what appears on the aisles is much more memorable than a shopping list which is dotted about all over the place. Mnemonics work. If I said to you, big elephants can always understand small elephants, you can spell because. Yeah? The students this afternoon, I said, Richard of York gave battle in vain. What do you know? The rainbow, the spectrum. Yeah? You get a letter, Valentine's letter, with SWARK written on it, which means. And of course, the best one is Burma. Do you know Burma? Be undressed and ready my injury. You should be ashamed of yourself. Be undressed and ready my injury. And it's always a chunking information into memorable bits. And so we worked really hard on that this afternoon to say, okay, here's all this stuff. Of course, it explains why spelling big words is so hard, but we'll come on to that in a bit. What does seem to happen is that we have a visual spatial short-term memory and a verbal short-term memory, and you know what? They do not communicate. They actually work separately. And they go up there into the central executive, and the visual stuff you remember visually, and the auditory stuff you remember auditorily, and there's not a lot of crossover, unless they're combined. Which is why we talk about multisensory learning. But I think we stopped multisensory too soon, as I said before. Multisensory is not a kindergarten, nursery thing. It's a year 6, a year 9, a year 12. All of us, multi-sensory. The more senses are involved, combine two sources of memory, we're away. We add the preferences. You think about Gardner's 7 intelligences. You think about Dunn and Dunn's 8 intelligences. You put all of that together into anything, and our students will remember. I shared this with the guys this afternoon. It's not a very good slide, which is to show also the importance of chunking. Mums and dads, the information we give, teachers. Because what this shows is that students tend to remember the first thing we say and the last thing we say, but nothing in the middle. Yeah? And this is because of this well-identified primacy and recency effect. This is a rationale for chunking, and it's a rationale for assessment for learning. And I'll make that case in a bit. Generally speaking, then, we ought to be giving our students shorter bites of instruction. Parents, our children, shorter bites, so that we do lots of stops, lots of starts, not too much in the middle, and they will remember more. There's no question about that at all. So, less in the middle, lots of beginnings, lots of ends, that will definitely be beneficial. The beginning, end, middle effect is what we're talking about, so there's the primacy, there's the latency. If we have lots of beginnings and lots of ends, in fact, we remember much more. We do not dip. So less is more. Less is more. So saying to our child, right, I want you to go upstairs, clean your bedroom, when you're done, I want you to do that, put your socks away, and blah, don't forget. Oh, and I forgot to tell you. No chance. No chance. Get the first one. Get the second one. Get the third one. Work them by numbers. And what is fascinating is that anything that works for dyslexic children will also work for your partner. So actually, it's good. It's good practice. Now this one is really scary. This is the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And this says that, look, at the end of a lesson, you probably remembered 80% of what you were told. And 10 minutes in, you were down to about 45%. 24 hours later, nowhere. And a month later, nothing at all. If you look at it immediately after class, you actually remember it all, and your curve is better. If you review it 24 hours later, a week later, a month later, you actually don't forget anything. You don't forget anything. So if we have students with vulnerable memories, and we know it, they're vulnerable, doesn't matter whether they're dyslexic or not, constant review, constant look at it again. It's just so powerful. Just looking over it, it's all it takes. I said to the students this afternoon, if you revise something in the way that we've done it today, in an interactive way, and in the morning before you go to school, you look at it again, that's what you have to do. Just look at it again. And that begins to lift it and keep it uppermost. And of course, 24 hours later, you still got it. A week later, you still got it. It's so important that our dyslexic students particularly do not fall into the, I've got a rubbish memory, so I'll revise last minute, otherwise I won't remember it. It doesn't work. We've got to get in early. We've got to build in the BEM principle. We've got to do the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And we've got to remember lots and lots of reviews is going to make a difference. What does cause memory loss is distraction and also needing to do something else. You've got to maintain attention if you're going to occupy your working memory. And it's also hard if you have to switch what we call one effortful activity to another. So trying to make sure that the next activity doesn't happen until the first one is grooved in is hugely important. What happens if you switch too quickly is it diverts attention from what's going on. It causes accelerated memory loss. And can I say from my heart, saying try to remember doesn't work. Once it's gone, it's gone. When you were doing those numbers, once you've lost those numbers, they have gone forever. You know, no man, it's like trying, right, under no circumstances think about an elephant. You just can't do it, can you? You know, it's there. So, once it's gone, it's gone. Accepting it's gone is critical, and give it again. But give it again with charm rather than attitude. Okay? Because it wasn't their fault, it's just gone. So let's put this together and think about spelling for a minute. Okay? Put this together and think about spelling. Craig Jackson is a psychologist in Wellington in New Zealand. Came up with this idea of close enough spelling. I've made this point to TAs this morning. At the moment, despite Go's best efforts, you still get more marks in SATs and GCSE for wonderful language with mistakes than boring language spelled right. Long may it continue. So the feline recline on the Persian carpet with spelling mistakes is worth a lot more than the cat spelled and that spelled right as it should be. As it should be. So if we know what you mean, then it's okay. But what we have to recognise is that look, cover, write, check doesn't work unless you do stuff first. Look, cover, write, check is only really visual. If you put look, say, cover, write, check, it's still only two things. So what we were saying this morning is that the power of syllables is critical. Now, syllables are fascinating. Let's think about working memory. 7 things, really, plus or minus 2 on a good day. Well, photosynthesis, I think, is 15 letters. So, it's just impossible. But the psychology of working memory says if you chunk stuff into bite-sized logical bits, you can remember more. Now, photosynthesis is only 5 bits. So if we chunk it into syllables, we've now got bite-sized chunks. And I would say, arguably, there are few jargon words that you cannot clap. I'm saying jargon words. And I'm saying primary school teachers, particularly at the moment, where we know there's not enough time in English to reinforce the literacy. So we've got to reinforce it through geography, and through history, and through. But that's great because they've got the big words. Tectonic, volcanic, nebuchadnezzar, I won't do that. But, you know, they're there. Opportunities for this. If you can clap it, you can spell it. That's it, or you can get close enough so we know what you mean. And what is fascinating is that a girl like Jenny, who doesn't have word attack skills, actually gets syllables. Syllables are universal chunks. And what we have to do with this, and I modelled this morning, is that we get a strip of paper, you clap your word, photosynthesis, you write it in syllables, and then you tear it into its chunks. And you model it up, and you rebuild it, you model it up, and you rebuild it, and then you look, cover, write, and check. You know what? You'll have it. Because you're doing it in a brain-friendly way. And when dyslexic students, who are perceived to have a disability with spelling, work this way, they actually get them right. They're more likely to get photosynthesis right than was or saw. Yeah? Which is fine, that's where the balance of power should be. So one of my 7-year-olds wanted to spell polyunsaturated for reasons known only to himself. Polyunsaturated. That's right on the cusp of working memory. And he did. Very dyslexic. Very dyslexic. But he did it this way. Clapped it, tore it, muddled it, put it back, muddled it, put it back, visualised it. He got it. And what is brilliant about this is, of course, he got it next week and the week after and the week after that. Mums and dads then, of course, if you're learning spellings for spelling tests, this really works, but it's slow. So you might have to say to the school, the primary school, that we're not going to learn 20, we'll learn 10. And I've never known a primary school have a problem with that. The teachers would rather we learn 5, 6, 8 words properly than 20 you know, as a waste of time. And what good schools, good primary schools do is they give the spelling test the following day, and the children, the target children, the priority learners, know they're only going to be tested on the ones they've been learning. They can have a stab at the others if they want, up to them. But there's no discrimination. We just take the papers in and we mark you on the ones you've done. And it works really well. So this is harnessing the power and saying, yes, okay, the perceived difficulty, if we teach you slightly differently, it's going to be good. What is great about this method as well is that these words will appear in their writing. So, you know, one of my boys, write me a story. I said, do you want me to write or spell? Which? Classic, isn't it? I said, I won't mark your spelling. He went, yes! And I got a wonderful story. Had I said, spelling is essential, he'd have written, one day I went to a graveyard. Then I died. Then I woke up, it was a dream. You know. Going for language is critical. And we can have fun with language. Secondary particularly. This is from primary. This is from primary literacy strategies. We should do this in secondary. Mums and dads can do this. Because this is about becoming aware of sounds. This is about substituting one sound for another. This is about separating sound. This is about deleting. So let's do it, just to show you what I mean. Okay, say photosynthesis for me, please. Right, say photosynthesis without the pho. Very good. Say photosynthesis without the sin. Very good. Say photosynthesis, replace the toe with grow. Very good. So what you're doing is you're playing with the sounds. Some of you, not everybody. You're playing with the sounds. You're breaking the sounds up in your head, which is what phonological awareness is all about. And if you can do these things, you're aware. All of these things, so you say, say great without the go, what have you got? All those sorts of things are absolutely critical. And playing with those in the primary setting to reinforce jargon words in the secondary setting is a basic skill. The secondary teachers are doing this. You know, what's hypotenuse without the high? It works. It works. It's all about becoming aware of syllable structure. So I hope I've argued for more explicit and more episodic. I hope I've argued to a degree for being more multisensory. Let's think about comprehension. Now, the work of Maggie Snowley down here is particularly important. She's doing some great things. She has been the lioness of phonological awareness for years, the work she's done with Charles Hugh, but she's changed tack very interestingly. Because although she's involved with studies, a long time ago, showing that good word recognition can be developed in the absence of good comprehension, she's also shown actually good comprehension can be developed in the absence of good word recognition. Okay. You don't have to be able to read every word. It helps if you can, but you don't have to. So, what do good readers do? Well, here we have 6 things. They connect. They predict and infer. Key skills. You may know that we are not doing very well in PISA, the International Reading Set. And 2 of the things our students struggle with is prediction and inference. We'll talk a bit more about that. Once we've predicted and inferred, we monitor and clarify, and we do those things down the bottom. Okay, well, let's think about a strategy of words, which is called reciprocal teaching. Now, reciprocal teaching is one of Patty's drivers. With a show of hands, please. Who's doing reciprocal teaching at the moment? Okay, not endorsing at the moment. Fine. I think we should. I think we should do it in primary. We should do it in secondary. I don't think in primary, I think we should do it in the foundation subjects. In secondary, I think we should do it in any subject where students are reading. Because it's a group-based thing. So what we will do is we will set up groups of 4 or 5 students. They can either be matched reading ability, mixed reading ability. They can be, you can have a group of students who can think it but can't read it, students who can read it but can't think it, doesn't matter. But what happens is that each student has a roll card. And you'll have a predictor, a reader, a clarifier, a questioner, and a summarizer. So we have a passage, and we work through it, and the reader says, okay, based on the topic sentence or the subheading, what do we think this is about? The predictor. And the group reads the topic sentence and the subheading, and then makes a prediction. And then somebody will read it, and they'll read it silently, they might read it to the group, They might pair read it, they might unison read, and then we say, okay, let's clarify. Now, what words do you think a younger student would need to be clarified? It's quite important. So they're now looking at this passage, and they're pulling out the words that they think a younger student would need to explain. You can see the psychology here, can't you? Yeah? And then, my favourite one, what questions then, the next student says, what questions would we have to ask a younger child to confirm their understanding? So now we're thinking about questioning. And finally, we have a summariser. It could be a one-sentence summary. My current favourite is haiku. You know haiku? The Japanese, yeah? 5 syllable, 7 syllable, 5 syllable line. If you can summarise anything with that. Or tweet, that's good. How many characters in a tweet? 140. How many 40 characters including spaces? Summarise it in that. It's such a good thing to do. Okay, so let's have a look at this and see if we can make it work. Here is a learning objective. Demonstrate higher order thinking skills with regard to conditions on Venus using Bloom's taxonomy. How young would I do this? I've done it with 8-year-olds. My 8-year-olds love Bloom. They understand Bloom. They can work Bloom. I'm going to differentiate slightly. One group will address a learning outcome through a series of Bloom comprehension questions. And one group will address it by designing and drawing and labelling a landing module. So I've got my dyslexic youngsters. I can have neither group, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to try and do this in a way that removes some of the issues. So what have we got? Well, there's Bloom. Not very clear. This is the new Bloom with creating at the top. It used to be synthesis, but it's now creating. And what we're going to try and do is get away from these rubbish ones down the bottom. Okay? We don't want these applying, understanding, and remembering, because that doesn't take any brain power. Politicians can do this. Right? We want analysing, evaluating, creating. If we work our students at this level, they will leave school and they will believe Fox News. Okay? Or the Daily Sport. Even worse. Or maybe Nigel Farage. No. So our questions will be here. And when you get these question stems, the minute you use these question stems, Jenny is thinking. Yeah. Because she can argue, critique, categorise, construct. She can rewrite in her head. Do all of that. If we limit her to what she can read and write normally, well, she will end up working down here. So our group doing the Bloom questions, we're going to say we want you to make sure these question stems are in the piece. So first of all, what we'll do our predicting, reading, clarifying, questioning, and summarising. Okay, we'll do that. So here's the passage. What are we going to do? Well, the predictor says, I want you to read the first sentence of paragraph 2 and predict. But I would add to that. I'd say, no, don't do that. Read the first line, the first sentence and the last sentence. Have a look at the first sentence and the last sentence of paragraph 2. Read those for me, please. And when you have, discuss with your neighbour, predict what this passage will be about. Predict what this passage will be about. This means that when Jenny starts to read this, she's in the contextual ballpark. She can now apply contextualised guessing, can't she? Yeah? Mums and dads, when this comes home for homework, use the same technique. Each paragraph, topic sentence, last sentence, predict. Okay? Then we'll read it. We can read it a number of ways. We can read it to Jenny, she can read it to us, we can read it together, we can pair read it. And what we'll find out is, yes, hey, you know what it's about all of that. We could then ask the question, okay, what words would need clarification? We can do that. We could say, what questions would you ask to test understanding? We could do that. We could ask you then to summarise it. All those skills would go in place. What we're going to do, actually, is put out the key points. Again, we did this today. We're going to now highlight the key bits, because remember, we're talking about what are conditions like in Venus. So we'll go through and we'll highlight the key information. That's what we've done. And then we come to the key bit, which is we're going to say, right, one group is doing Bloom questions. Okay, and one group is going to use these question stems to ask the questions that prove that we understand what's going on. So they will be asking questions like, argue. make a case for the fact that Venus is not a promising destination for a man's life. Okay? And we can do that. We could say, categorise the risks of Venus. We could say, which we are going to say, design a landing module that could land safely on Venus. Because that's what the other group are going to do. First of all, we're going to do a rubric, and then we're going to design. And those students are proving that they understand what's going on. It's not conventional, it's not traditional, but it is perfect evidence of achievement. There is that. We've got reinforced glass, we've got diamond coating, we've got air conditioning, yeah, we've got all those sorts of things. The other guys are writing the questions, and what does work well with this is say, actually, write the sort of questions that you would ask the inventor of this spaceship to prove that it's going to be successful. You've got your two groups going, but the point about all of it is that we're working at this higher level of thinking. We're not saying, tell me what I've just told you. We're not saying, what does this passage say? We're saying, let's take the information and do something different with it. And this is often the level at which our dyslexic students begin to show what they can do. Provided we get away from the basic reading bit, and it's exactly the same in university. James Harlan talking on the way over. When I've been running my master's courses, a lot of my teachers say, look, I haven't written an essay since 1842. And it's a real problem. When I've given my teachers paragraph starters, frameworks, scaffolds, their writing is so much better because they don't have to worry about the structure. Now, some people have said, well, no, that's not fair. Of course it's fair. I had a row with somebody who seemed to think that getting the referencing right was more important than good ideas. You know, and I had to say, well, I'm sorry, I don't think you're right. Well, the referencing will come. Let's get the ideas first. And by giving paragraph starters, giving structure, giving all this support, limiting the number of references they had to look for, meant that most of their ideas go into brilliance rather than struggling with it. And of course this links with Hattie. Now this is Hattie again and visible learning. Huge piece of research with these meta-analyses, 50,000 studies on what works. And what does work, of course, is assessment for learning, particularly for dyslexics. And this is Dylan Williams from one of the London universities, again another meta one. When implemented well, formative assessment doubles the speed of learning. Doubles the speed of learning. So the summative is important, but the formative is so important. And so what I've given you in your handout is a number of assessment for learning tools that are especially good for our dyslexic students. And also show us that our learning is working. And this is the word might, possibly the best word in the world for question. You say to them, what would happen if you landed on Venus? And they'll probably tell you what it said in the passage. You said what might happen, and it immediately opens it up. So might is a great word. Students writing questions, yeah. The minute paper, tell me in a minute everything you know, that's wonderful. Muddy's point works extremely well. So you say to the students, okay, what's the least clear thing I've said so far? Everything, thank you very much. But before you tell me your muddiest point, you have to, would you write this down for me? Write down the letter C, then the word 3, then the letter B, then the number 4, then the word me. What does that say? C3 before me. Got a muddiest point? Yeah, great, but you see 3 before me. Come and see me when you see 3 people. If it's still muddy, I'm your man. If it isn't, we've solved it. If it's still muddy after you've seen 3, I've got a problem, I haven't solved it properly. This is so powerful. 1 sentence summary, love it. Peer marking, definitely. Where do they get them from? The good old TES resources. We've got to, if you haven't signed on, you've got to sign on. It's the work of Mike Gershon, amazing guy. There must be 40, 50 of these. Really, really worth having a look at. And the point about them is that they enable us to spot when it's going wrong. And dyslexic students particularly, primary, secondary, FE, higher education, we need to get in early when it starts to go pear-shaped. Because what they often don't have, because of early experience, is the grit and the resilience. They will get there, the sheer bloody mindedness eventually, but on the way to that, we need to get in early, spot what isn't working, and do something about it. So where have we gone? We've gone visual, yep. We've gone metacognitive, yep. Explicit, episodic. More frameworks and scaffolding. I think, I'm just about going to do it. It seems to me, whenever I give good frameworks and good scaffolds, I get ability-appropriate writing. And the reason is, and again, it's the psychology of memory here. If I take away some of the storage, I get better processing. If I take away some of the processing, I get better storage. Writing is an issue. It's a huge memory-related issue. If I can help with the storage bit, I get better processing. And so what I'm going to do, the final thing I'm going to do, talk about exposition. Because exposition, it seems to me, is the main source, the main form of writing we do in the world, in life. I'm going to get shouted at now, but I'm going to say it. I do not understand my English colleagues in primary and secondary's preoccupation with fiction. Because the only time I write fiction in the real world is when I do my income tax return. The rest of the time I don't write fiction. Okay? The rest of the time I'm using exposition, mainly. Report, recount, narrative. Now, I know fiction is hugely important, but I think sometimes we perhaps could think about something else as well. And in a secondary setting, like geography, science, history, colleagues don't need fiction. They need other stuff. Exposition is key. If we can crack exposition, we can. And this, if you Google 5-paragraph expository essay model, you'll get that. And what this shows is that exposition actually hinges on the opening paragraph. Because in fact, each sentence in paragraph 1 is the topic sentence for the remaining paragraphs. And once they've got that, they will write exposition for you. How young? 8-year-olds. For me, probably with you doing it, 7-year-olds, because you know what you're doing. Mums and dads, easy, it's key. So let's have a look at it. There it is. This is about my dog. My dog Romeo is one of the best pets anyone can have. He's beautiful, easy to care for, playing, lots of fun. Yeah. So, beautiful pet. So what you do for paragraph 2 is you begin paragraph 2 with a synonym version of that second sentence. And that writes it. He's beautiful, easy to care for. He's a beautiful tripod, shan't he? Let's write about that. Play with him with lots of fun. Romeo with lots of fun to play with. And we write about playing with Romeo. Always takes care of me. Takes care of me. Honestly, it is as easy as that. And they just go, and they're away. So, I was doing one on my imaginary pets. You Google these, loads of good ones. Mine is, I've got, they say I've got Fang, he's a cross between a frog and an alligator. He's called a frog-alator. Okay? And so you get him to draw it and make it up. Be careful with the names. I was doing this one, this was crossing pheasants, actually. and a pheasant, a robin, was called a fobbin. And a pheasant, an eagle, was called a feagle. And a pheasant with a duck was called Nigel. But we'll do the same thing. What we'll do is we'll set this up, my imaginary pet. And this one is, there's my topic sentence. That's what he is. We'll get the same model as we had before. He's very ugly and difficult to look after. So it means that paragraph 2 will be about having an ugly pet that's hard to look after. Paragraph 3 is playing with exciting and dangerous. Okay, so we know how that's going to go. Paragraph 4, yeah, I'm losing a lot of friends, he's biting them. And paragraph, the final sentence repeats the first idea. So when we put all that together, we get that. Yeah, we get that. There it is. My pet Fang's a frog-alator. Cross between that, very good after, yeah. And then what we do then is, there's paragraph 2. It's not working very well. There's paragraph 2, paragraph 3. You know what? It works. It just works. And I haven't got time. What I'd love to do is challenge you to come up with 4 or 5 big ideas from today. Write each one down in a sentence. 5 sentences, paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 is about your second sentence, your second idea. Paragraph 3 about your third idea, your fourth idea. Round it up, you've just written an expository essay. Once that framework is in place, the storage demands are minimal, all the processing can go. And it comes down to the concept of a good lesson, which is very much Ofsted, very much national curriculum. You know what? It's further education and higher education too. Because it's very clear outcomes, so we know where we're going. Can I suggest, though, that it is more important that students know what the outcomes are rather than write them down? My inspector background worries me when I talk to students who've written the outcomes down but don't know what they mean. Whereas I'm much more interested if they do. We have engaging, we're going for stretch, very important. Engaging methods which push individual ZPDs. Tell your neighbour what Vygotsky ZPD is. Zone of proximal development. Your zone of proximal development is what's almost out of reach. You can't quite get there. It's stretch. But you can with a teacher. You can with a TA. You can with a parent. You can with a peer. So you're pushing individual. This is so important in higher education. Yeah? We're pushing you to your level. Engaging questions. All I'm going to do is mention pose, pause, pounce, bounce. If you don't know what it means, go onto the TES website, the TES Resources website, and there are some wonderful slides on that questioning technique. The alternative evidence of achievement will come through in a good lesson, in a good lecture, because I'm very keen that my students interact with my ideas when I'm running my master's courses. So I would lecture on a topic, and then I would pull them back and we would review it. We would do the forgetting curve, and we would put it into a different form. So whatever I've been talking about, I would ask for that mind map, that storyboard, that flowchart, that one-sentence summary. As important in higher education as anywhere else. Teachers, we can only mark what we can see. If we can't see it, we can't mark it. So visible learning is important. Feed forward feedback. Don't tell them how they did. Tell them what they need to do to make it better next time. It's as simple as that. Waste of time telling what they did, they don't care. But they are interested to know that if they did this, they get a better mark next time. And the student voice, the key question, how close are you to achieving the lesson outcome? How close are you? What have you got to do next? So, I'm trying to argue that dyslexia is best seen as a preference. And I'm arguing that when the metacognitive preference that is dyslexia is honoured and respected, and you have the rights to be dyslexic, many, not all, many of the learning issues become less of an issue, and you are more likely to become progressively forbidden. Viewing you as being disabled means, in fact, it's always somebody else's problem. Always somebody else's problem. And it doesn't help anybody at all. And I'm going to finish with this. This is done by a dyslexic student. He says, human beings got much in common. I can draw the internal structure of a chicken from memory, which sets me apart from everyone else, which I think is true. I hope you'll forgive me if I do a little bit of advertising now. What you're getting is a snapshot of the whole school training that I offer, and I've got a couple of new courses. The thematic approaches is to do with the national curriculum, the sort of stuff I've been talking about, which works well as whole school training. Total teaching is my conceit that if every teacher, every lecturer knew just enough of what I know, let's say, just enough, so that when they spot somebody who think, you know what, that's a touch of Asperger's, that's a touch of ADHD, that's a touch of dyslexia, they can take frontline action. Yeah? So those are those courses. If you're interested, my details are up there. Before I finish, huge thanks to the team that's put this together. You know, James, Angela, everybody, so many people work so hard to make this work. Would you join me in saying thank you, guys? Because honestly, without them, and finally, before I open for questions, I'm just going to repeat my point. Get it right for dyslexic learners. And you know what? We actually get it right for everybody. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for your attention.